I've read that you've been doing STEM outreach in the classrooms for over a decade now, or close to a decade. So can you tell me a little bit about that work?
So it started when I was in college. I joined the Engineering Ambassadors Network, and what we did there was we went to different local schools in the communities, and we would talk at classrooms. We'd sometimes do activities with the kids, and we just teach them about engineering and kind of introduce the concepts to them.
Did you know that while STEM jobs are projected to grow over 10% in the next decade, women still make up less than 30% of the STEM workforce? This glaring gap highlights the urgent need to inspire and support the next generation of engineers. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Danielle Passaglia, professional engineer, lead green associate, and a senior mechanical engineer at SmithGroup, about her journey in the AEC industry, the importance of STEM outreach for K-12 students, and actionable ways we can close this gender gap. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the Women in Engineering podcast. And with that, let's jump right into today's episode. Now let's jump right into the main segment of our episode. Today, I have with me Danielle Passaglia. Welcome to the Women in Engineering podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So to get started, tell me a bit about yourself. What led you to your current role at SmithGroup, and how has your background in architectural engineering shaped your career in the AEC industry?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the Chicago suburbs, and my family had a lot of teachers in the family, but not too many folks in STEM. And so growing up, I knew I will say I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I enjoyed aspects of teaching. So when I was young, I thought, oh, maybe I would be a teacher like my mom and my sisters. Maybe I'd go into like math teaching since I really enjoy math and science, do more advanced classes. But then as I grew older, I was looking at other options of what I wanted to do. My parents really wanted me to kind of discover other avenues. And when I was in high school, I started taking drafting and CAD classes, and that kind of got me interested in design. And so through that, I was able to look into other types of programs. For a while, I thought maybe I'd go into architecture. But my mom really just had me kind of sit down with Google at the time and search what other type of majors were available. And she had told me one day to look in engineering, mostly because it was a very secure job field. And I think there was scholarship money involved. So anytime with today's day and age, not having to have school payments or debt would be great. So I started looking at engineering. And for a while, I saw mechanical and civil, but it was just through a random Google search that I came across architectural engineering. And I felt like it was a great fit. It kind of combined my enjoyment of design and drafting, but with the engineering side, since I always did love math and science. And since I saw that major, I went kind of full force towards that. There were only a few programs at the time in the country that had an accredited architectural engineering programs. So it limited my choice, which was great because it was almost overwhelming the amount of colleges and majors, especially when I was just looking at mechanical or chemical or even like dual majoring. And so I kind of enjoyed having that limited sphere to look into. And so I did a couple of like high school programs to kind of introduce myself to it, but I really enjoyed it. And so I went the architectural engineering route. I went to the University of Nebraska, which they have a great 5-year master's program. So 4 years plus an extra for your master's. And I got a full ride scholarship. So my parents basically booted me out of the house for that.
Okay.
It was a great major, and it encompassed everything I liked. And then that's how I got into architectural engineering, because it is a very niche area. So once I went to school for that, while I do other general education engineering classes, you really are getting fit out to work in the AEC industry with this major, because you not only do your gen eds, but you really do emphasize on the specifics of building engineering. So we look at not just thermodynamics and heat transfer, but we look at indoor air quality, and we look at how to design buildings. And I didn't just take mechanical classes. I took electrical, structural, So you really learn how to look at a building through the lens of multi-disciplines. And from there, I went into the design route out of school. So I started at a consulting firm, an engineering consulting firm, and I worked there for 7, 8 years. And at that point, I was looking at a time in my career where I was really looking for more female mentorship and some projects that would challenge me a bit more. And that's how I ended up at SmithGroup. And they are an architectural engineering integrated firm. So it was a nice change of pace to also work in-house with architects, but also be able to work on some more challenging projects. And they also just have a great, strong amount of female mentorship, which was really what I was looking for at that time in that shift. And so yeah, I've been there for about 8 months, and it's been a great shift and
Oh,
learning a lot. So
so great to hear your story. I have to ask, coming from a family of teachers, why do you think your mom was encouraging you to explore other professions?
So I think growing up around teachers, and I have so much respect for them. My mom and my sisters who are teachers, they have a level of patience that growing up maybe I didn't emote as much of. And while I loved being around, seeing them, interact with children and see how they're affecting the next generation, I think my mom knew I kind of had a different mindset to how they thought. I kind of had a different. I was very much more left side of the brain. I was very much more
Mhm.
analytical, and I I liked more challenging and complex solutions in terms of a different scope of things versus
Yeah.
teaching people. I liked to actually do it and kind of get my hands into it. So, and I think partially also at the time, while my mom loves her job, I think she thought for someone going to college, looking at majors and scholarships, if you can go into STEM, we need more women in STEM. And so
Yeah.
I think she also thought I would have the good aspects to succeed in STEM, because not only do I have that analytical mind, but I was also a much more social person. And I think she thought those were traits that would really help me excel in the field. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about, being drawn in when you took that course in high school that had a drafting component to it.
mhm.
What was it about that course that you really liked?
Yeah. So I took a few of these classes. The first one was hand drafting, so
Oh,
very
wow.
architecture based, and there was something just so satisfying about having the graphite pencils and these, doing your measurements and the scaling and creating something that you kind of see a building we walk through every day, but actually seeing how it starts and then forms was really satisfying. And then from that, I took AutoCAD classes, and again, I think just the satisfaction of like shapes and measurements coming together to form a bigger picture was
Hmm.
really satisfying. And you still have your creativity to kind of change it or put your own take on it. It was very design based, and I also really loved my teacher, Mr. Wetland, from Wheaton Warville South. So I still remember it, and it was such an impactful class that it was really a bright spot in my day. And I think, teachers make such a big impact of
They
what we
really do.
recall growing up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, architectural engineering being a bit more niche. So going into the program and going into your career, what did you sort of understand of the profession then versus now?
yeah. So when I first when I first learned about the major, it tells you learn about building sciences, you'll take away how buildings work, and you'll learn about the different systems involved, electrical, structural, mechanical. And so with that kind of broad idea of things, that was what I expected going in, but you don't obviously realize all of the theory and engineering and science behind it all. So we always laugh. You could tell the engineers when they walk in a room, because we look up is our first instinct in a building to see, what systems are involved, how it's built. So you definitely start viewing things with a different lens. And during my when I started the major, you could tell it was probably different than your initial expectation of what an engineering degree was. I would say architectural engineering majors off the bat tend to be more women, still not as much, but still, I would say instead of having maybe 10% of women in our classes, it was about maybe 30% were women. And you could tell because of the multidisciplinary nature and the field we go into, it seemed like soft skills made a bigger difference. So I would say you got a bit well-rounded of a group of people, both with technical skills, but also with communication skills, just because it's such a needed commodity in this industry. And yeah, I think as my time had grown throughout my major and in the field, you kind of realize that the best engineers are ones that have those well-rounded characteristics that can bring out the different uniqueness of each person to make a project successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but I have to ask, do you get to use fancy pencils at work today?
Everything is digital nowadays. I don't get to use fancy pencils. I still always have like a sketchbook for calculations. I'm a very visual person. So when someone's talking about equations or we're looking at, fact checking things or doing some engineering checks, I even versus like Excel, I like to put it on pen to paper. It's just how my brain works. So I didn't get to use. I could buy a fancy pen. I still have my graphite pencil from high school. I've kept it.
That's cool.
So yeah, but now we get cool digital softwares we get to use. So
absolutely. So you didn't fully escape the classroom, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit. So I've read that you've been doing STEM outreach into classrooms for over a decade now, or close to a decade. So can you tell me a little bit about that work?
Yeah, definitely. So you heard a little bit about my background. So with teachers in my family, I don't think I fully escaped that appreciation of teaching the next generation. And so it started when I was in college. I joined the Engineering Ambassadors Network, and what we did there was we went to different local schools in the communities, and we would talk at classrooms. We'd sometimes do activities with the kids, and we just teach them about engineering and kind of introduce the concepts to them. Typically between K through sixth grade was the main focus, and it could be anything where, teaching them how roller coasters work, and then we'd make little roller coasters with insulation and marbles, and teach them kind of the engineering process and questions to ask. And so I started that, and I always just really enjoyed getting back into the classroom, because someone who wasn't introduced to engineering until high school, I really would have appreciated kind of learning about this earlier on and getting my mind open to those ideas at an earlier age. So anytime I can go back to the classroom, I try and do that. And so Engineering Ambassador Network really sparked that. And then when I graduated college, I knew that was something I wanted to continue on, and I have found avenues to do that. So whether it was through my volunteering at ASHRAE, through student activities, going to classrooms via them, or through Tech Girls or Chicago Engineering Foundation, I found ways to still be in the classroom and teach kids and spark kids to think about engineering. But it's always been a big passion of mine. I also think I learn a lot, and it kind of brings back my passion for STEM, is seeing the excitement in kids.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, because when you work in the industry, sometimes you can be bogged down by cost and schedule and everything like that. It's fun to get back to the basis of why STEM is so fun and important, and that you can really put your unique spin on it. So I'm happy I continued that on, and I found other avenues as well, not just in the classroom, but other ways to reach out to kids about STEM. So
what are some of the big things that you've learned from being in the classroom, or some of the experiences that have re-energized you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always fun is to hear the questions kids have about what we do, about what it takes to be engineers. And kids always look at things in a different way. And what it really helps challenge me to do is to explain these concepts in a way kids can understand. And by doing that, it helps me honestly in my day-to-day, because we're not always talking to engineers, right? We're sometimes talking to owners or clients that do something totally different. And being able to discuss those ideas and simplify them in ways to make other people understand, it really makes you a stronger engineer. I think when you can explain something in multiple different ways for multiple people to understand, it just solidifies your knowledge on the topic. So
Oh, good.
that's
Yeah.
always very rewarding. But also just seeing, again, the questions kids have or the excitement they get when they see something work, it kind of reinstigates that idea. We're doing something really fun and really cool, and kids always really enjoy to see the buildings we work on. So, if we tell them like, "Oh, I worked on this building," and they're like, "Oh, I've been in there. Like, I've seen that." I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty cool." You don't always think about how it works, but it's like, yeah, you're comfortable because of this. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I did a brief stint of outreach work in the classroom too, but it was older grades, 7 to 12. And, I remember going into some classes and it was great, and some of them, and it was really hard and challenging. And so you're going in classes as young as grade 2, is that right?
Yeah, definitely. So second graders, and honestly, I've spoken to high schoolers too, and I think second graders are so any K through 5 grades, honestly, they're so unabashed. Like any questions are great. They always have more questions than less questions, which is amazing. Versus with older kids, I think sometimes whether it's they're shy or maybe they feel like they know, I tend to get less questions from them. And so it's fun to see, when you're younger and unjaded, and you just anything that pops into your mind is fair game. And that's really what I encourage when I talk to kids in general, is you can never ask too many questions, and there's no dumb question. I'd rather be asked crazy, silly questions than no questions at all. So
Yeah.
hopefully, those things we instill them at those young ages carry over as they get older, so they'll continue to ask questions. Because I was definitely that kid in high school and always was like, I have more questions to ask. So
So
I was
you're saying
never,
they should
I
carry
was
the
never embarrassed.
front of the class, hand up all the
Yeah.
time? Yeah, good. You're saying that they should bring that with them even into university and the workplace. Do you think that that's a skill that we sort of lose as we grow up?
I think so. I think we sometimes, as we get older, we have a fear of rejection, a fear of failure, a fear of asking the wrong thing. But I think that's something that, again, you have to kind of develop that confidence over time. Really, it's better to ask a silly question than not ask the question and then
Yeah.
be silly, get something, find out afterwards, shoulda, coulda, woulda. So I think that's really an internalized fear we have, confidence thing. But I hope, people who surround kids and as they grow up into their areas, they should never feel embarrassed to ask questions. And that comes just as much internalized from the kids as it does from who they surround themselves with, the adults they surround themselves with. So
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but are there any standout questions that you've got from kids, silly questions about engineering or the topics
I
you're
mean,
presenting?
a lot of times, they'll ask like, oh, something as simple as, how do buildings stand up, or what
Oh,
material are buildings made out of, which is only funny because there's so many things buildings are made out of. But no, the funniest thing, and it's not necessarily a question, but when I show pictures of projects I've worked on, and a lot of them are in Chicago, in the city I live in, and the kids will be like, "I live over there," or they'll point out their apartment buildings and where they work, or where their parents work, and I'm like, that's really exciting. So they just get excited to know the buildings and surround themselves with. But otherwise, a lot of them, even things of, where does the electricity come from, right? Like how do we get electricity there? But also kids are learning more and more. So I was at a second grade class and I was showing them pictures, and kids knew what solar panels were. They're like, I've seen solar panels, or I've seen windmills, and so it's already starting to click and understand that, and just understanding how they work is kind of the next step.
oh, that's great. Well, I found a little quote here. I think I found it on your LinkedIn. I just wanted to ask you about it. It's talking about stereotypes. So kids feel like they have to be amazing at math and science, and they have to test up in grade school to be an engineer. To me, that's flawed logic. It's really about curiosity and being able to ask questions and solve problems. There's many different faces to what an engineer is. They don't have to be quiet. They don't have to be social. There's no one shoe fits all. And so I think it's the biggest thing just to try to convey that to kids. and also that it's just fun. So yeah, this covers stereotypes, and I would just love to hear a little bit more about what the kids that you're interacting with think about engineering when you first meet them, and how do you bring up the topic of stereotypes with them and try to overcome some of those negative ones.
Yeah, definitely. So when I first ask kids what they think of engineers, a lot of them say like train conductors is one of the big things, or they think like people that make video games or sit behind computers. And so I think they have a very kind of narrow mind, only because it's not been introduced yet. So whenever I speak to kids, I kind of show them, I have a, presentation where I talk about, what my day looks like. And like, yeah, sometimes I'm sitting behind a computer, but sometimes I'm on site or I'm in meetings with people or I'm talking or I'm going to conferences and showing them that, it has many different looks to what a day in life could be for an engineer. But whenever I talk about who would make a good engineer, and I always try to emphasize curiosity and asking questions, even in my books. But what I do on my when I present to kids I ask them to raise their hand if any of these questions apply to them and keep it raised. And I always ask, I was like, all right, well, do you like math or science? And sometimes there's a few hands. I was like, okay, do you like to solve puzzles? Do you like to understand how things work? Do you like to work with your hands? Do you like to play games? And then and then I'll show them some pictures of, whether it's Legos or Build-A-Blocks or Tetris or Minecraft or any of these, video games that are out now that kids like to play or anything like that. I'm like, or train sets. I'm like, raise your hand if you like to play with any of these things while you're growing up. And pretty much by the end, I get through all my list of questions. Everybody's hands are raised. So,
Yeah.
and then I just emphasize, I was like, if your hand is raised, you've already been thinking like an engineer or felt like an engineer or a person in STEM. So there's really no limit to what you can do when thinking of whether you want to go into STEM. And I think it's understanding that, especially at younger ages, these concepts, you're just sparking and igniting that interest. Most of
Mhm.
what engineers do in the field, we learn when we're in the field. So a lot of them feel like they need to excel, at math and science, but that's not really the case. You definitely need to be a hard worker. You want to, and curiosity. And those are the biggest things to me. I think you can really achieve anything with those two main
Yeah.
objectives.
Oh, that's amazing. So you've actually gone beyond outreach into the classroom. You've actually authored a couple books as well. There's two titles that I have here, Lucy Goes Green and Lucy's Engineering Adventure. Tell me about these books and what inspired you.
Yeah. So I have been involved in ASHRAE for about 10 years. Yeah. Since I was in college, and I had always been involved in their student activities, which is their outreach program. ASHRAE is
Mm.
an international organization for mechanical engineers. They create and write a lot of our design standards and guidelines that we use in our industry, but they have a whole aspect of outreach amongst their other divisions. And I was the student activities chair of the Illinois chapter at the time, and I was doing some regional training. And we were just talking about what's been working for other chapters, what areas we want to improve on, because it spans through not just K through 12, but also college. And when we were talking, we were saying, ASHRAE does a lot at college and high school levels, but what we were really struggling with was finding ways to connect to that K through 5 group. Just because sometimes our activities are for more of an older crowd or for middle schoolers, it's hard sometimes to reach to that K through 5 level in a way they can understand and grasp. And during that training, I just kind of threw out the idea of a children's book. ASHRAE has publications. They publish all these standards and books, so they have the tools. But I was like, why not a children's book? Let's, and again, this is a regional conference, so not even all the people that are involved, but people liked the idea. We just didn't really know how to go about it. ASHRAE is it's a volunteer-based organization. And so there's lots of hoops and hierarchy to go through. But after that training, I really liked the concept. And I even thought, I was like, I know how I want to introduce kids to the AEC industry. I'd want to, because like I mentioned, I'm a very visual person. I want to take a kid through a building and show them how it works. And so after that training, within like 4 hours after I had written a first draft of Lucy's
Wow.
engineering adventure. I remember
The
calling
ideas
my
just
mom.
came.
Yes, and I remember calling my mom. I was like, "Mom, I like this. Let me read out a few of these stanzas and tell me if you think this is cute." And after I wrote a few drafts, I got some emails for people in the publication side of ASHRAE, and I was like, I really want to try this idea out. Like, I've already got a rough draft, but I'll formulate it more. And it kind of took off from there. It was a lot of persistence on my end, just re-emailing, but throughout the process, I did have to get approval through the publications committee. I had to get a voted approval. I had to get funding for it from some of these committees,
Okay.
since we had to, pay for a publisher, or not pay for the publisher, but pay for an illustrator. So it went through a lot of hoops, but finally, and part of it was, they weren't sure if there was a need for the books, right? They were like, ASHRAE does we're a professional organization. We do these guidebooks. Like, what are we going to do with kids' book? But there was enough pushback where we were able to do it. And we finally, so it took about 2.5 great years after I first initialized that idea that we published the first book, Lucy's Engineering Adventure, which takes Lucy through a building with her dad and seeing how building works and all the different components, mechanical, structural, lighting, all that stuff, just to kind of get that general idea of our industry out there. And it ended up doing really well. ASHRAE is one of ASH's best-selling publications because clearly there was a need for it. Yeah.
There was a need. Any plans for a third or a fourth?
That's the hope. So the second book, Lucy Goes Green, introduces sustainability and renewable energy. So the idea is all these books will kind of introduce some big picture items. And then if we want to go more niche later on, we can. But yeah, the third book is Lucy's Carbon Footprint, at least right now. We'll see if that title stays. But that's going to take Lucy, teaching about carbon and carbon footprints and how even kids can help be more mindful and reduce that, but also just teaching them, explaining some of these high-level concepts of carbon or climate change and things like that, especially in our industry where decarbonization is such a big thing right now. So the drafts are, I've written my final draft. It's currently getting reviewed by publications, and hopefully in the next year it'll get published.
Well, they sound really needed, and we'll definitely be putting the links to the books below the podcast so people can check it out. I know I am for sure for all the kids in my life. And you're reminding me how energizing it can be to do outreach work and to think about how to encourage the next generation to consider these professions. And so I'm curious, do you have any advice for other engineers that would be looking to incorporate outreach into their professional growth trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to get involved. There's tons of different organizations you can look into getting involved in for outreach, but also if it's something that maybe locally you don't see as much, I've also just cold emailed schools and said, hey, if you want to bring kids over to the office, we'll do an activity. My office will host, we'll do presentations, they'll get activities. So definitely, if you feel like you can't find organizations to get involved with, you can take it into your own hands too. I'll email schools and be like, I can come in and talk if you want or do a presentation. So I would say only limiting factor is how much time you want to put into it, I guess. So
right.
Tons of opportunities. I always try and say yes to everything, whether it's career fairs or working with organizations that have it. It ends up always leading to more opportunities. So
do you think this is something that employers are generally supportive of or should be supportive of?
Yeah, I think my employers have always been very supportive of it. And I think honestly, it's becoming more and more common to support it because I think people are realizing we really need to help support the next generation, especially if we want to keep having more diversity and more women in engineering. We're going to have to start reaching out at a young age to kind of mold and shape these people to identify that engineering or STEM can be a career path for them. So I think employers are encouraging it, and the worst thing they can do is say no. So it's still worth asking and be that change if they haven't done it in the past. But I also think it looks great on a company as well. It's thought leadership for the company to have employees take that initiative. And again, I think only good things can come out of it, really. So
awesome. So let's get the next generation of ladies into the field now. Like, let's talk
Yes,
about what do you
definitely.
love most about your job? Let's talk about, the things that stand out to you being an architectural engineer, working in consulting that you'd love to tell younger people about.
Yeah, definitely. I think in our field, one of the most rewarding things is being able to see what we work on take shape in a physical form. And it's something unique to the AEC industry. And it's an exciting thing to see. In terms of our work, again, I love that every day is different. All the challenges are different. The people we work with are different. And so those challenges, whether it's how we communicate effectively to clients, how we want to make them happy and give them what they want, but also trying to create a better world. So how we can implement, whether it's energy savings or cost savings or creative solutions to find that middle ground. There's no one right way to do our jobs. So it really gives us that liberty to stretch those boundaries and look at things in different ways. I also just really enjoy the different personalities you do get across the industry. Like I said, there's no one size fits all for an engineer. And in fact, I think the best companies, the best culture, and the best projects are when you have a great mix of personalities and dispositions. And that's because we think of problems in different ways, we think of solutions in different ways, and we bring different strengths to a project. So I think the best is when you do have a great mix of people.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And what about, we talked about the good things. Are there any challenges that you faced along the way that you want to talk about and how you overcame them?
Sure. I think there's always a challenges you'll meet across the way. I think I categorize them in two different ways. There's external challenges, which can definitely be hard, and you have to just learn to either ignore or overcome. And that comes with either people's misconceptions or judgments or criticisms. But being a woman in STEM, I think it's, first of all, I think the industry has grown a lot. Even in the years I've been here, I can't even imagine how much it probably is overcome in 20, 30, 40 years when I hear of women who started their careers back then. So there's always going to be some issues or challenges of comments or concerns, especially being a woman in the field, or even just a general generational issue, when you're younger engineers and kind of overcoming that hump of working with older professionals and understanding you both have things to give to a project and not minimizing the impact younger engineers can have on a project. So those are external challenges. And then the other side of the challenges are internal for sure. So everybody's heard of imposter syndrome. I think when you're surrounded by intelligent people that have so much to give, sometimes you question the value you can offer to a project. It's all, comparison is going to be the root of all evil, in my opinion. But
Absolutely.
understanding everybody has some value to give, and those are mental blocks. I always try to tell myself, there's something I offer that's uniquely mine to a project, and I don't need to be the best at everything. That's why this industry is so group oriented, because you want to use the strengths of others to make a project great. So that's why I really do think the best projects and the best leaders are ones that understand the strengths of others and bringing those strengths to make it an overall strong and complementary project. So those internal humps are hard, but that's why, again, it's something you have to understand. You have value to offer and to add. And just because someone is better at something than you doesn't mean that you don't have other things to offer. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And the concept of unique value is so important too. And maybe, when you're a young person early in your career, it might not be totally obvious to you what your unique value is. I would love to hear, if you have any strategies or thoughts around, the work that somebody can do to make sure that they do understand what they're bringing forward to a team, to a project, to themselves and their own career. Are there any tips or strategies you could share?
Yeah, definitely. I am very kind of goal oriented person. So and like I mentioned before, I like everything written down. So I always like to kind of keep track of things I've done well on projects, whether it's things I want to continue doing, strengths I've had or added to a project. And then I also have a list of things I want to improve or work on, and just kind of keeping mindful of those lists. And then things I want to not things maybe I haven't had a chance to do, but I want to do to challenge myself, because I think, without feeling challenged, you aren't growing. So I want to feel like I'm always challenging myself or growing in some capacity. And so that's how I find it helpful. And I also, again, I try and use attainable goals that I can use to track and measure that. Whether it's, I want to work on this type of project within the next year, or I want to pass this accreditation test or something along those lines. I try and find ways I can measure that growth.
Yeah, such good advice, and especially writing down what you think you did well, because I think naturally we sometimes just keep track of the things we didn't do well, right, or the problems. So seeing it on paper, it sounds like it can be really helpful to make sure that you're actually giving yourself a more balanced view of what actually happened.
Yes. And I mean, I think our industry, we are very lessons learned or ways to improve. I do think in general, our mindset for supervise, we don't always recognize or reward things done well. And that's also something I just try and be very vocal about to my supervisors or people I'm mentoring, to understand, what level. Typically everybody wants to be recognized for doing things well. So I will be very direct and just say, like, I want feedback, but I also want positive feedback. So I know I'll keep doing that. I'll work well, because I thrive off of compliments too.
Oh yeah, I
um,
think we all do.
yeah, it's the same feeling of getting an A in a test at school, right? You want to feel like you're excelling at what you're working towards. And so when I supervise younger engineers, that's always something I try and recognize, especially with challenging projects. I'm like, I know this has been hard, but I really value what you've put in, and you've done a great job with this, and things like that. So making sure we recognize younger engineers and bring that forth as we grow into higher roles at companies. I think recognition is a huge thing all supervisors should be cognizant of and do more of in their fields.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great reminder. Okay, just switching gears a little bit, because I know some of our audience would love to learn more about what you do at work, and especially when it comes to the sustainability piece of the work that you do. So I'm curious, how do you approach integrating sustainability and functionality in specialized building design? Why is it important to strike this balance?
Yeah. So as a engineering consultant designer, we design what is going into a building, mechanical systems, things like that. Mechanical takes up the most energy in the building. So, they say 40 buildings take up 40% of the energy use in the world. Well, mechanical systems take 40% of the energy in a building. So when we want to try and make the most impact for that, a lot of that can be done at the mechanical systems level. And the importance, obviously, with global warming and climate change, and just the cost of energy and the limitations of clean water, of natural energy, things like that. We want to be really cognizant now of what our buildings are doing. So that's where we have to strike a balance, because, everything comes with a price and a cost. And typically, clients will have a vision of what they want and what their needs are. So we're trying to balance how to make sure we can capture that vision within their price point, but also bring in these creative solutions. And for a while, I would say, those creative solutions came at a much higher cost. And I think slowly over time, though, they're starting to meet where we can get these efficient solutions and justify the pricing. There's also so many now government incentives or state tax incentives and grants to help mitigate some of those first costs, to make it worth it, where your building will be running more efficient and you'll get that price back. So we're seeing a lot more electrification in general in the industry. And depending on your climate, Chicago's a cold climate, so it is hard sometimes when we keep hearing buzzwords like heat pumps and electrification, just because for many years that technology wasn't going to necessarily work for some of these super cold climates. But again, now we're starting to see where we are able to utilize this technology, maybe not fully, maybe hybrid approach. So we're seeing a lot of heat pumps nowadays, but still using, electric boilers potentially as a hybrid backup system. Geothermal is something that's been around for a while, using the Earth's natural heat sink to use for heat reduction. And it's very energy efficient. It's a great use of our natural resources, but it also needs space. It requires footprint. And so we're finding, ways to accommodate those within the footprints of projects, whether, it goes underneath parking lots or the building itself, and trying to integrate it with the structural system so you don't have to drill multiple times. So there's lots of creative solutions to doing that. I think the biggest aspect is getting these ideas in front of your client really early on to talk through these options, understanding like the feasibility, and then having people willing to look at the cost benefits, those programs and grants. Because if you can justify it at a cost saving solution, everybody would love to have efficient systems, so more clean systems. So I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And again, it's at an architectural engineering firm like SmithGroup. It's great that we can look at these solutions much earlier on in a project, because now we're working alongside architects and the owners very early on in design. And so it's been very, very rewarding to see how it can come to fruition.
Yeah, that's a good word. I was going to say, it sounds like it's a very exciting and important time to be in the industry. And there's a lot more funding, willingness to adopt new and innovative solutions. So yeah, it sounds like a great time to be an architectural engineer.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, just to close it off, do you have any final piece of advice to give to listeners of our program about breaking barriers, thriving in their careers, or just in general to inspire the next generation?
Yeah, I would say I think it's really who you surround yourself with is going to be the biggest differentiator in how your career is supported and in how you feel about yourself. So find whether it's mentorships or allies or friends to bring you along for the ride. I always like to think, as a woman in STEM, but also just as an engineer in the field, we should always be building people up alongside us. There'll be people we are working alongside with for the rest of our lives. So I would never want to, that's why you can't really be competitive with other people, be competitive with yourself, and make sure you are bringing people along up with you, because that is how we will make a stronger industry for the future generation and a more inclusive and welcoming environment for young engineers looking to enter.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. I really enjoyed speaking with you. It's really been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was very fun.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss upcoming episodes featuring interviews with inspiring women engineers, discussions about industry trends, and so much more. Go to womenandengineeringpodcast.com, where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, may your engineering endeavors be as remarkable as the women whose stories we're sharing. Stay curious, keep innovating, and engineer a better future.